Hello everyone, my name is Hebbe and this is a masterclass on how to do digital mastering. And I will go through every detail to show you how I get to a finished product. So the first thing I do is I have a look at the tune when I put it into my DAW, and then sometimes I can see some things that I think could be a problem. For me at the moment, it has some great dynamics, but having too much dynamics might be a problem in the end for the limiter. So I definitely need to compress this probably. And the first thing I would do as well is just listen to it. Listen to the whole tune, or at least listen to most of the tune and skip through it a bit. And then I'll be able to tell if something is off, or looking at my metering and seeing that there is too much bass or there is not enough high end. I can also hear that, of course, but the metering is very important for me. So what I do, I'll get myself a meter, and my favorite meter is the Duro from Waves. It's just a simple decibel meter, but I've been using it for a while, so I know kind of how to use it, because every meter reads a bit differently, and I found this to be one of the nicest ones for me. So let's listen to the tune. So what I'm seeing is I'm getting a bit too much gain. For me to start mastering, I like the gain to be a bit lower, so that when I work with analog style plugins, which are calibrated differently, so you have to use a lower input gain for them to sound good. And that's why I always turn down the master a bit. And if I see here, it's actually, I think it's yeah, it's about 0 dB, hitting about 0 dB, and that's not what you want. So let's go into the file. We turn on my mouse. There we go. And let's turn this down about 7 dB or something. Let's see how it hits now. A little bit more. Seems about right. So the first thing that I do after this is I go to my EQ, and it's already engaged. You see a low cut and a low cut in the sides, so a low cut in the mono and a low cut in the sides. The reason why I do this is to give the master a bit more of a tight sound. So if it's messy in the low end, you probably, yeah, it's not really hitting as much, and it takes a lot of energy out of the tune itself. So I want to make sure that I take away some unwanted frequencies or unnecessary frequencies to make the tune sound clear and just hard hitting. Especially when you come to the mastering part, you don't want a lot of 20 Hertz or lower to be there, because it takes up a lot of energy when you have low end content. So let's start by listening to the low end and see if it's all muddy or if it sounds good. I think it sounds pretty good already. I think the mix sounds pretty clear as well. So let's have a listen. Now you can hear the low end rumble if you have good headphones or good speakers. Otherwise you won't be able to hear this. So usually I take out a little bit, let's say up to 24 hertz. Then in the sides it's gonna be a different story. So I'm gonna take out a bit more and maybe even scoop out something later on. For now I'm just gonna make some low cuts and see how the sides sound. So let me sweep up all the way so you can hear all the content, all the frequencies. And you can hear this tune has a lot of side content. And this is basically what I'm taking out, or about what I'm taking out, because what you're hearing right now, if you're listening to speakers that have mono or stereo capabilities, because otherwise you also won't be hearing anything. So let's listen to it. It's probably hard to hear, but if I solo it, you can probably feel that it's a bit more, it's a bit cleaner. Let's turn it up. Very slightly. It's hard to hear. It's hard to hear for me as well. But it's usually also a precaution that I take. So I make sure that if there's a part of the tune that has a lot of dirty low end, and I would say everything below 20 or 25 hertz, it's not really working well on the sound system because it just rumble. It's just messy. It doesn't hit hard. So I want everything to just be cut out, basically. The next thing is the multiband compressor, and the reason why I do this is because after I need some tight low end, usually on a tune, depending. If the tune has a lot of dynamics in the low end and it's meant that way by the producer because it's a way to convey emotion or whatever, or the humanity in the tune, that kind of, if I hear that, I would leave that in. But for now I will just have a listen and have a look at my limiter, because then I can see the dynamics of the tune itself. So let's have a look and have a listen to the low end, the very sub frequencies. As you can see, the kick is hitting about 5 decibels or more harder than the sub itself. This means when I made the tune, I didn't sidechain the kick and the bass. So that can be a problem later on in the limiting stage. That's what I'm thinking now at the moment. Because when I push it into the limiter and the kick is still about 7 decibels louder than the sub, you will get a lot of dirty, ugly distortion, and that's not something I like. I don't think anyone likes it on his own tune. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pick up with the compressor. Well, it's already doing that, but I think the attack is a little too slow, and it's also picking up on the parts that are not peaks. So I want to be able to only grab the kick, turn it down, and when the sub is hitting, I don't want it to be compressed. So the kick and sub are roughly maybe 3 decibels apart, because also you still need the impact, because I don't want everything to be flat and boring, you know. So let's start. Turn on the attack, make it a bit faster, and now make sure I only pick up the kicks. So if I hear a kick, then I'll make sure that it's going down, and I might turn the hard knee on. So now it's only compressing when it's actually hitting. You see the kick, kick, kick. Maybe turn down the range a bit more. Maybe a little bit more even. threshold up. Maybe the release a bit faster. This looks like some really nice tight low end to me. If I would turn it off, let's turn the compressor off, you can see the difference. What I still need to do usually is do some makeup gain, so I make sure that I don't lose any volume. Actually, I'm gaining some volume in this sense. If you listen and you see, the peaks are way bigger. So the difference between the kick and the sub hitting is too big at the moment. And now they're nice and tight, but there's still like a 3 decibel difference. And that's what I like. So this is the part where I work on the sub, but I won't be working on the other frequencies probably. I will have a listen now, but usually I don't like adding a lot of bands because they really mess up the sound, makes it sound unnatural to me. So that's why I usually have a band on the low end to keep that in check. And also I have maybe 1 or 2 full band compressors that work on the entire tune to make it smooth together. You know, it's like a glue compression, and that's usually what I use it for. Or maybe if the snare is too loud, I'll make sure that the compressor is a really fast attack, and then I'll make sure it only hits when the snare is playing, and that way you also change the dynamics of the tune, make it a bit less. That way when you go into the limiter, you don't have to crush it that much to get volume. So that was, let's listen to the tune now, with and without the compressor. It's gonna be hard to hear, but yeah, I can definitely hear there's some more volume in the low end. For this genre of music, you definitely want that. You want it to be a hard hitting in a club, and you want it to be pretty constant in the club. So let's go to the saturation part. And if you see all these modules, I kind of work in a more analog style way. Of course, it's not analog, but the way I see it is I have a few modules that I use all the time. So for me, it's like my studio. I have like a rack, for example, of different units that I always use, and I get to know them over the years. So now I feel that my mastering is getting better and better over the years because I get to know these plugins really well. And if I would switch a plugin, then I would really delve into them and use them all the time to get to know them. I don't really switch these plugins out basically. So what I do sometimes is change the routing. So I might go into a compressor first or into the distortion unit first. But it really doesn't make too much of a difference for me most of the time. And I really love these routing over the years. So with this, I already have this set up in a way that I usually like to work. This is a saturator, which I tend to use on almost everything basically. So you'll have a listen to it, and we're gonna make sure that we keep the same dB level. So we're gonna be gain staging this. Otherwise, it would be louder, and we would think it would be better, but it's not. It's just louder. So we want to make sure that when we listen to it in solo, or when we bypass the plugin, that the volume is the same. Okay, let's loop this section. If you see, if I bypass it, the volume drops. So I need to make sure that the output is adjusted. Turning down the output. Let's listen now. We can gain a little bit more volume. Yeah, so this is now gain stage, and when you listen to the plugin right now, you know exactly what it's doing. And I love what it's doing. It's actually adding a lot of harmonics over the whole tune. and all the frequencies. And in that way you gain a lot of volume, but your dynamics are also being squashed a bit. So this is acting as a EQ, also a compressor in a way, you know. It's coloring the sound heavily with its saturation. So maybe I might turn this one up, or maybe this one, maybe take it off if it's too much high-end being added, because this knob adds a little high-end shelf, basically just a little EQ knob. But it usually works really well, just putting it in there and not turning it, so keeping it 0. It even adds a little bit like that. You hear when I turn it up a lot, and sometimes I do this to know what it's actually doing. So I turn it up a lot and I kind of find the limits of the saturation. And if you hit it, it kind of starts breaking up. I like the sound, but it's not what I'm going for in this master. So I want to have a clean but loud sound for this master. Yeah, so I turn it a little bit more, but also I turn this air amount off because it's adding too much brittleness and maybe too much shine on the high end. And this is a dark tune, so I don't want to have too much high end on it. So this one is the saturator and it's done. I might actually go back if I'm in the limiter stage to different modules to adjust them a little bit. So it's not the final saturation, but now I'm going into some compression. My favorite compressor for mastering, basically. I've used a lot of different ones. I used a lot of clean ones, digital ones. This one is an emulation of an SSL compressor, but it's a one-of-a-kind one. So this is one that actually they changed the parts and they rebuilt it. And now it is the only one that sounds like this, and they emulated it and it has a great sound to me. Usually I start out like this. This is just like simple bus compression basically. So it will pick up on most of the transients pretty quickly, but it wouldn't squash the transients. But let's just have a listen and see what we like. So now I'm picking up the volume. Maybe a fast release. So really fast attack, it really squashes down the tune. I gotta make sure that my makeup gain is correct, otherwise I'm just listening to something that is louder but not better. That's always the most important thing to me. Make sure gain staging is correct. See where it's hitting. So around 12, 13. Yeah, so it's about the same. Just gaining it a little bit more volume, of course. And I don't like a lot of compression usually, so mostly my master saturator does most of the compression for me, and that's why I have another one. I have a Ozone 9 exciter, and this one adds different frequencies, but I usually really like them. So turning this band all the way up, it sounds too much. The brittleness, high end, it doesn't sound nice. So I want to blend it in a bit more. I want to go to around this area usually. So let's have a listen and see where we put the high end. That seems about nice. Let's go to the high mids. As you can hear, it really brings out the snare, which is nice. I love snappy and a bit louder snares, but not painful. So what I usually do is I find them being matched most of the time. So even though it's a multiband compressor or a multiband saturator, I find them matched about the same usually. But I don't use the low end one because it kind of, I usually don't like the sound of this one. It kind of breaks up and distorts it too much. And then I tend to lose a lot of energy in the low end. It becomes too much distorted. And now as well, I'll go to the sides and see how much I can give it in the sides. Let's gain match this. So this is doing a very different job than the BX or the Black Box HD2, but it's kind of making the song sound more together and less brittle, but still it kind of glues it together more, makes it sound more real in a sense. But that's just how I perceive it. Kind of gives it a high-end, say, analog quality to it, and that's why I like this one. The next module would be Soothe, but this is something I only use when I hear frequencies that I cannot just scoop out with an EQ, and I would really go in to find the frequency and to make sure that it only works there when it's needed to be. So when it's on, probably some painful frequencies around 2 to 4 or 5K. That's usually what I'm using it for. Or sometimes on the very low end, let's say there is some rumble in, let's see if I can turn this off. See if there's some rumble in the 150, 250 area. And it's nice that this one is only working when it's necessary. So it's dynamic EQing. See, I'm kind of lost at the moment in this plugin. Alright, so. First gotta turn it on. And this is, of course, way too much. I would never use it like this, but let's just turn it down and find a frequency. We can even use delta, which is only listening to the frequencies that it takes out. So there might be some painful frequencies right here. Turn up the selectivity. Kind of just mess with these knobs, see if it sounds better or not. This takes away the sharpness. I like that a lot. But it's also kind of messing with the impact of the tune. So if you have a nice snappy snare, it will also pick up on that and will kind of make it a bit weaker. And that's what I don't like. So I use this module when it's absolutely necessary, when there's a painful frequency or a resonant tone that I cannot EQ, because otherwise it would affect the whole tune. So let's just keep this off. Let's just keep this off. And the next thing is the imager. The imager is a module that adds some more volume in the sides, or it can add, with the stereoize function, add some wideness. effect, a stereo effect basically. So it probably has some algorithms that delay the sides, and it gives you a stereo feeling. Let's have a listen to the tune and see if it needs something like this. Maybe a little bit in the high end, so I would go for a small amount. Definitely sounds nice. Not too much, just a little bit. It kind of makes the tune a bit more broad, a bigger tune, more interesting. Even in the lower mids, on the bass line, it becomes a bit more wide. I don't like it on the snare because I kind of tend to have the snare in the middle, so it always hits hard. That's kind of how I like my mastering, but if it's necessary, so sometimes I get a tune that's super mono, and then I really get to use this one well, and it really gives a lot of spark to the tune. So when I send it back to a client, they usually say like, oh wow, this is not what I expected, and this module does a lot of that work. So the next one is an EQ that I tend to use a lot. This is also the EQ that gives it its last polish if it's necessary. Maybe some scooping I do with that. Sometimes I go back into the Q3 to do some scooping right here because it's a bit more accurate. But this one has a particular sound that I really like, especially the side high cut. It really brings the tune into focus, which I love. I don't know why, but even though I already use a side filter, this one added to that is just even better. So let's have a listen and then turn some knobs and see what it does. So I'll also have a look at my limiter, because usually I already start limiting before even these modules if I need to use them. But for me the limiter is so important to the sound because it can really mess it up, or it can make the sound loud and clean. So a lot of work is being done by this limiter. So let's just push it into the limiter, and if we hear something weird we go back into the EQ, or maybe we need to adjust the limiter in a sense. So that's a lot of limiting, of course, like 4.2 dB, but I usually I think I can get away with that and it sounds good. A lot of it has to do with the attack and the release setting and the volume of the sub. So if your sub volume is too high, you cannot really push it into the limiter very hard. So that's why I really use this knob to turn it up or down. So let's listen to the sub and solo and see where it's hitting. I usually want about -3 dB, and maybe I want the kick to be hitting exactly at 0 dB, so it's not really being cranked into the limiter, but it still sounds nice. Yeah, this is exactly what I would like. Basically, it's not taking away too much energy, but it's also not being squashed into the limiter. And that's one of the biggest things I hear when people master at home and they send me a version, is that there's no way you can get the same volume out of a track if the limiter is being pushed by the sub. you will get a lot of distortion, and the tune will sound too muffled basically, because it takes out all the high end. So let's listen again without the low end solo. Maybe use the distortion module a bit too much. Let's turn it on. This sounds about right. So let's see. I don't think we need any more processing. I think it sounds great. The other modules I might use in a different session, but for this one I'm entirely happy how it sounds right now. And now I'll go into the final part of mastering, and it's just having a look at where the tune starts and make sure that the ending is not being cut off all of a sudden. Make sure there's no noise or silence that's unnecessary. So I'll clean it up right now. And the first thing I see is that the tune starts a bit later. So I'll take out this part. And at the end there is also a bit of silence. So I'll take this out as well. Do a little volume ducking so it doesn't have a click at the end. And let's have a listen to the other parts of the tune. I might need to adjust some things. So what I just did is I heard that maybe it could get a bit more transient volume, so a bit more snap. And basically the look ahead is causing, if you add a lot of look ahead, it will kind of take away the snap of the tune. So also it might be nice to have a bit more look ahead because it makes it sound cleaner. Because now I'm on the aggressive style that I usually use, but it can cause distortion if your gain staging isn't good, so if your low end is out of place or if it's too loud, that kind of thing. But for me, I always like this the best because it really gives you clear, snappy, punchy masters. And having a little bit of attack makes sure that it picks up a bit later, so it goes into the limiter and it probably starts clipping, but it's so short that you probably don't hear it, but it gives that nice snap. Same with the release. I have it on pretty fast this time, and this really just, when I twist it, I just start listening to what it does to the sound, because I'm not very technical, but I'm all about if I think it sounds better, it's better, basically. So let's listen to the tune without the processing. And I've made it so that I can easily just bypass everything and listen to the tune without any of the effects. clearly gained some loudness, but it's still dynamic in my opinion, so it's not too squashed. The next part is just selecting it, going into let's see, exports. Go to exports, and then what I usually use is the 16-bit depth, because that's what people use for CDs and online, for Spotify to upload it. And then also the loud ditter function, because this is a loud tune. This is the best function to use for that. Also I have normalize on, so I make sure that even if it would be clipping, just to be safe, it makes sure that it's turned back to 0 dB, so you'll never get any clipping. And we can export now.